Today, I wanted to talk about assaults in the workplace. In the New York City area, we're seeing these stories almost every other day just by looking at the headlines. You'll see MTA bus drivers being punched in the face by a rider, a nurse getting assaulted, or a store clerk being robbed. You might ask, are those injuries going to be covered by workers' compensation? The answer to that is generally yes, they are. The person's at work performing a work-related duty, and within the course and scope of their duties, they get hurt. That's a workers' compensation claim. In these assault cases, that can be really important because the medical bills for the injuries that someone could sustain in assault could be really, really expensive. Assaults often involve significant injuries, oftentimes to multiple body parts. Things like traumatic brain injury are common in assaults. Someone gets punched and falls to the ground or gets wrestled to the ground, punched in the head a bunch. These are really serious injuries. The person can miss a substantial amount of time from work and have serious permanent impairment. The good news for workers in New York is that if you're a victim of one of these assaults in the workplace, it's probably going to be covered through workers' compensation. But there are some cases that might not qualify for workers' compensation if you're assaulted in the workplace. New York essentially draws a distinction between assaults that have some sort of nexus or connection to your employment duties versus those that are purely personal in nature. And that purely personal aspect is really key. So let me give you a few examples. Number one, let's say we have a nurse who's giving an IV to an intoxicated patient. The patient's obviously all frustrated, they're intoxicated, and in their frustration, they punch the nurse in the face. All right, these stories, you see them all the time. I wrote a blog post on this within the last week, and I actually cite a few examples pulled directly from the headlines in New York City of this almost exact example. That would clearly be a covered work-related accident. The nurse is doing her job duty of administering an IV to a patient, and she gets assaulted. Easy case there. Second example would be, let's say, an MTA bus driver who's attacked after a rider refuses to pay their fare. That too would be an easy call. Clearly work-related. It's connected to the job duties. It's obviously the role of the bus driver to require the person boarding the bus to pay their fare. If they don't, they're well within their right to say, hey, look, you got to pay your fare. If they get assaulted because of that, clearly you have a compensable work-related injury. Third example would be, let's say we have a cashier at a store or a store clerk and they're robbed, right? If they sustain injuries in that too is going to be a covered work-related injury. They're working at the store in their role when someone comes in and robs them. On the opposite end of that, there are cases that would probably not be covered under workers' compensation, even though the assault may have happened at work. And the reason for that is if the assault is purely personal in nature, it's not covered as a workers' compensation accident. Let me give you a few examples. Let's say I have a gambling debt and my bookie shows up at my office and says, Mike, it's time to pay up. And they assault me. Although I'm at work when that assault happens, the assault had nothing to do with my employment as a lawyer. It had to do with my gambling debt. That would be considered purely personal in nature and would not be covered as a workers' compensation accident. The classic example typically given to show something that wouldn't be covered under workers' compensation, even though the assault happens at work, is the case of a former lover showing up at someone's work site and assaulting them. As serious as that may be, it's not a workers' compensation claim in most instances because there, the assault was purely personal in nature. It had to do with their romantic relationship or now lack thereof, and that's what led to the assault, not something to do with the employment-related duties. What I should say, and I think it's really important to mention, is even in those cases that might seem like they're purely personal, you really have to do a very sensitive and thorough analysis of the facts because sometimes there can be something that makes the assault a little more closely connected to the employment than initially met the eye. There's a huge gray area when it comes to assaults. Every single case is unique in its own way. What I would say is the vast majority of cases where there's an assault in the workplace, probably going to be a covered work-related injury. There's others that will be closer calls, and then there'll be others that are so obviously not a work-related injury. So if you've been assaulted in the workplace in New York and have questions about your case, I want you to know that I offer free consultations for injured workers to discuss their case with me directly, either in person at my office, over the phone, or by video. Again, this consultation would be completely free of charge to you. You don't pay anything. There's no strings attached. We'll sit down, we'll talk about your case, and we'll explore your options. You can go to my website, McConnellinjurylaw.com, to sign up for that free consultation, or you can call me at 914-810-0510.